Throughout the history of Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire, Aegon Targaryen has been many things. He's been a conqueror and a tyrant, a stillborn son and an egg, or even a Blackfire. There have been 12 Aegon Targaryens mentioned in the lore, so in this video, I'm going to talk about all of them. By the way, for all you show-only folks, this video is definitely going to spoil how House of the Dragon ends, cause I need to explain how each Aegon Targaryen was born. So if you don't want to know who wins the throne, don't watch between these timestamps. You can start watching again when I talk about Aegon the Unworthy, because he's probably a character you've heard of before. But don't worry, I'll warn you again when we get there. The very first Aegon Targaryen wasn't even a king, he was just a Lord of Dragonstone. He was born in 114 BC, the same year Daenerys the Dreamer dreamed of the doom of Valyria, and the Targaryens moved into Dragonstone. We don't really know anything about the Targaryens during the Century of Blood, but we do know that this Aegon Targaryen was the son of Daenerys, and he married his sister Aelena, and Aegon and Aelena ruled Dragonstone jointly, so he was kind of a feminist, I guess. The next Aegon Targaryen is the first Aegon Targaryen we actually care about, Aegon the Conqueror. The dude had 2 wives, both of whom were his sisters, and he had a bad dream about White Walkers that made him want to use his 3 flying sky nukes and conquer Westeros for totally humble reasons, unrelated to manifest destiny. He didn't care about being king of the 7 kingdoms, guys. He just wanted to forcibly unite everyone under a dragon regime for their own protection when the White Walkers come trotting down on their zombie horses down past the wall. And he kind of failed at being king of 7 kingdoms, because Dorne straight up said no, and handed him a letter, and he just said okay, and only ruled 6 kingdoms like a little bitch. Well, actually, if we include the Riverlands as its own kingdom, which it is after the conquest, then Aegon does technically rule 7 kingdoms, and once Dorne finally does ally with the Targaryens, centuries later, it becomes 8 kingdoms. But that only works if we don't include the crown. After Aegon the Conqueror, the next Aegon Targaryen was his grandson, Aegon Targaryen the Uncrowned. This Aegon was the son of Aenys the First Targaryen and Alyssa Velaryon. Aegon the Uncrowned was supposed to be king after his father Aenys died of indecision, but Aenys' brother Maegor came flying in from Pentos, and I mean he quite literally flew on Balerion the Black Dread from his exile in Pentos to King's Landing, and Maegor then usurped the throne from his nephew Aegon the Uncrowned. Aegon was preparing to battle his uncle for his rightful throne, until they fought each other on their dragons, Balerion and Quicksilver, and the Black Dread absolutely destroyed the much smaller Quicksilver, causing the death of both the dragon and Aegon. Before Aegon died, he was the cause of the Faith Militants' uprising, as the Faith were outraged when Aenys I insisted that his children, Aegon and Rhaena, be wed to each other. If Aegon hadn't been murdered by his uncle in a dragon battle, he might have been stoned to death by a zealous mob of incest haters. But Maegor later died too, and Aegon the Uncrowned's younger brother Jaehaerys took the throne. Jaehaerys married his sister Alicent, and was super excited to not be a virgin anymore because he had sex with his sister when she was 15, and her first son Aegon Targaryen died 3 days old. Alicent said Aegon died because she was attacked while pregnant with him at Jon Keel's pool in Maidenpool during a royal tour. The Faith of the Seven was still upset about all the incest going on within the Targaryen family, even after Maegor the Cruel spent years brutally waging war against them. So, 3 holy sisters attacked Alicent as she was naked and pregnant, trying to bathe in the pool. Jon Keel's pool is said to have magical healing water, so maybe Aegon would have lived if she had her bath. Or maybe 16 was just a bit too early to be a mother. The next Aegon Targaryen lived all the way to 6 months of age. This was the youngest son of Baelon Targaryen the Brave and his sister wife, Alyssa Targaryen. They already had 2 sons, Viserys and Daemon, but Alyssa really liked to be incestuously inseminated by her brother. At her birthing bedside, Baelon said, "They call me Baelon the Brave, but you are far braver than me. I would sooner fight a dozen battles than do what you've just done." And his sister wife responded, "You were made for battles, and I was made for this. Viserys and Daemon and Aegon, that's 3. As soon as I am well, let's make another. I want to give you 20 sons, an army of your own." Well, Princess Alyssa's royal womb was not as strong as her mother Alicent, who had 13 children, and Alyssa died later that year of birth complications, 17 sons short of the 20 she promised her husband. Finally, we arrive at a successful Aegon Targaryen, the son of Viserys Targaryen and Alicent Hightower, who is no longer a spoiler since he was just in the recent House of the Dragon episode. But I am going to spoil his life and everything that happens after him, so if you're show only, skip forward to this timestamp in the video to avoid House of the Dragon endgame spoilers. This Aegon Targaryen is known as Aegon II because he's only the second Aegon Targaryen to become king after Aegon Targaryen the Conqueror. You only get a number by your name if you sit on the Iron Throne. Aegon Targaryen, or Aegon the Usurper, was the 6th king of Westeros, and was crowned by Sir Criston Cole the Kingmaker because no one wanted his half-sister Rhaenyra to be the queen. Well, that's not true. Half the realm wanted Rhaenyra to be the queen, so they fought a war over it, and Aegon won. Aegon was said to be handsome, but he was also depressed and degenerate. He married his sister Helena, but also had 2 bastards, one from a girl who he won sex with at an auction in Flea Bottom, and another one from a serving girl in the Red Keep. Aegon bonded with his golden dragon Sunfire before the age of 13, and Sunfire is said to be gleaming and beautiful, a stark contrast to his rider Aegon II, who was sullen and wroth. Both Aegon and Sunfire were injured in the Battle of Rook's Rest, Aegon being severely burned on half his body. His armor melted into his arm, and he took over a year to recover on Dragonstone, his mind becoming clouded with milk of the poppy. Several years later, after another dragon-riding injury in which both his legs were shattered, Aegon refused milk of the poppy, as he remembered how addicted he became the first time, and how it weakened his head. Aegon ended up winning the Dance of the Dragons after he fed his half-sister Rhaenyra to Sunfire, but it was no true victory in the end. Aegon Targaryen the Younger, the son of Princess Rhaenyra and Prince Daemon, was forced to watch his mother be fed to Sunfire, and was then held hostage in King's Landing by Aegon the Elder. But when Aegon the Elder died due to some unfortunate poison in his Pepsi, Aegon the Younger was pretty much the last Targaryen left to take the throne. So Aegon Targaryen the Younger succeeded Aegon Targaryen the Older and became Aegon III. Aegon III married Jaehaera Targaryen, who was Aegon II's daughter. This union brought together the Greens and the Blacks at last, but Aegon III didn't really feel like a victor. He experienced his mother, father, his entire family, and his dragon Stormcloud all die. As a boy, he was very close with his brother Viserys, and Rhaenyra only named him Aegon as a fuck you to Alicent Hightower, who already named her kid Aegon a few years before. During the war, Jacaerys Valerion, Aegon's older half-brother, sent him and Viserys to Essos so they wouldn't die, but their ship was attacked by Greens, so Aegon III escaped back to Dragonstone on Stormcloud, who was riddled with arrow bolts, and his brother Viserys was left behind. After the war, Aegon III hated dragons, since they were the power that caused all the destruction in his family and his kingdom. He was joyless and gloomy, and hardly ever ate or drank. He ascended the throne when he was 10, so a council of regents ruled for him for 5 years. His hand of the king was Sir Tyland Lannister, his main regent and protector of the realm, Lord Leowyn Corbray. The worst regent was Lord Unwin Peake, who undid Aegon's decisions of who to name to the Kingsguard, put on a public punishment of every man in the Red Keep's dungeons, and tried to scheme to make Aegon marry his daughter. Aegon's wife, Jaehaera Targaryen, had seemingly committed suicide, but she might have been murdered by Unwin Peake. So then Aegon Targaryen married Daenerys Valerion, with whom the king had his heirs. Aegon was happy for a while a few years into his reign, when his little brother Viserys returned from Essos, where he'd been hiding during the war. Aegon felt guilty for abandoning Viserys all those years ago, but Viserys forgave him, and became his companion once again. The last dragon died during Aegon III's reign, earning him the nickname Aegon the Dragonbane. When the melancholic King Aegon III died of TB, his son Daeron succeeded him, but Daeron was a little shit who wanted to actually rule Dorne instead of just pretending to, so he was killed in his invasion of Dorne. Then his brother Baelor became king, but he showcases what happens to your brain on too much faith of the Seven, and he starved himself to death because God told him to. Thankfully, neither of those idiots had kids, so Aegon III's brother Viserys became king. Viserys II and his associate wife, Lara Rogaire, had Aegon Targaryen IV. Aegon IV was the 11th king of Westeros, and probably the worst one too. Aegon married his sister Nerys, but Nerys preferred their other brother Aemon the Dragon Knight, so it was a whole incestuous love triangle. Aemon was the perfect knight, pious and gentle, but fierce when need be. Nerys was pale and beautiful, and was so devoted to the faith that she may have been a septa had their father Viserys II allowed it. Aegon was the troubled sibling, gluttonous, lustful, and corrupt. Aegon also liked to fuck a lot though, and when Baelor the Blurst was still king, Aegon IV had sex with Daena Targaryen, Baelor's sister wife, and she gave birth to a bastard called Daemon, later known as Daemon Blackfyre. Aegon had a bunch of mistresses, but he still stayed married to his sister Nerys, who he hated but kept around for the sake of cruelty. Nerys had a difficult childbirth with Prince Daeron, their first son and heir. The queen pleaded with her husband to let them both simply live as brother and sister, not husband and wife, now that she had given him an heir. Aegon responded, "That is what we're doing," and continued to force her into the marriage bed. The way Aegon treated Nerys angered their celebrated brother, Prince Aemon the Dragon Knight. Aemon, despite his hatred for his brother, died defending the king from Dornish assassins. Aegon IV completely misruled and mismanaged his realm, and made his biggest oopsie when he gave Blackfyre, the ancestral sword of the ruler of the Iron Throne, to his bastard son Daemon. He was obsessed with bringing dragons back into the world, perhaps because he knew about Aegon the Conqueror's prophecy. But his method of obtaining dragons was expectedly unworthy, as he hired pyromancers to build him mechanical dragons with wildfire propulsion guns, which burned down a quarter of the Kingswood. Aegon Targaryen IV finally died of fatness in 184, but his last act as king was to legitimize all his bastards, which was a lot, and this neat decision caused 5 generations of civil war in Westeros, known as the Blackfyre Rebellions. The next Aegon Targaryen is Aegon Targaryen V, born 16 years after the death of Aegon Targaryen IV, the Unworthy. Aegon V was also known as Egg, which is short for Aegon. Egg was also known as Aegon the Unlikely, since he was super far down in the succession. A lot went wrong for him to become king. It all started with Daeron II, who was the son of Aegon the Unworthy, and was a great king who married Maria Martell and finally brought Dorne into the kingdom of Westeros via marriage, not warfare. Daeron's son and heir was this badass called Baelor Breakspear, but he was killed in a tourney, so Baelor's son Valar became the new heir. But Valar and his younger brother Materys and King Daeron II all died in 209 of the Great Spring Sickness. So, Daeron's second son Aerys I became king, but he died in 221 with no living heirs. So now Daeron II's fourth son, Mycor, becomes Mycor I, and he already had his son Aegon the Egg in 200. Mycor died in 233 in battle, but Egg was Mycor's fourth son. A great council was called to see who would be the new king, because there was an older female heir called Viella and an infant son, Aerion, who were born to Egg's dead older brother, Daeron the Drunken. Egg V became king because his other older brother, Aemon, was a maester and refused the throne, so Aegon Targaryen became an unlikely king, born the fourth son of a king, Daeron II. Egg V spent his youth traveling all across Westeros with Sir Duncan the Tall, a hedge knight who took him on as his secret squire. Egg learned to love the small folk and turned into a really level-headed and kind king. He later named Dunk to his Kingsguard and married Betha Blackwood for love. He spent his reign trying to improve the lives of the small folk across the realm, but found himself lacking the dragon power to force his lords to honor these liberal reforms. Throughout the years, Egg became enamored and obsessed with Targaryen prophecy and the idea of bringing dragons back to the world, just like Aegon IV. Egg V's big idea was an attempt to hatch dragon eggs at Summerhall. Previously, the tragedy of Summerhall has always been shrouded in mystery. Why would a kind, competent king like Aegon V create a fiery disaster that brought upon the deaths of his son, his best friend, many other family members, and himself? The answer, thanks to House of the Dragon, is probably that Egg knew about Aegon the Conqueror's prophecy regarding the White Walkers, and became obsessed with the idea of bringing the power of dragons back to his family, for the sake of both forcing the lords to respect small folk, as well as a defense against the Long Night. Aegon V's tragic death wiped out a significant portion of the Targaryen family, which is why the family status is so weakened, with very few heirs when the main story begins. Aegon was succeeded by his second son Jaehaerys, since his first heir died in Summerhall, and Jaehaerys became Jaehaerys II. He and his sister wife, Shera, had Aerys II and Rhaella. King Aerys and Queen Rhaella then had Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, another dragon-obsessed, prophecy-minded warrior. But when Rhaegar was 13, his mother Rhaella gave birth to a premature baby brother named Aegon. Just like little Prince Daeron before him, Aegon died within a year, and all these dead babies were another factor in King Aerys going nuts. All his sons were dying. Well, all except his eldest, Rhaegar. Since there was no sister or cousin or aunt for Rhaegar to marry, thanks to the Summerhall disaster, Rhaegar married Elia Martell of Dorne. Elia gave him 2 children, first a daughter named Rhaenys, and then a son named Aegon, whose birth nearly killed her. Rhaegar was clearly trying to go for the 3 heads of the dragon prophecy with his kids, named after the conquerors, Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya. Rhaegar's Aegon was in need of another sister then, a Visenya, but Elia Martell was too weak to bear another child. So, as you do, Rhaegar ran off with the forbidden love, Lyanna Stark, in order to complete his 3-headed dragon, to fulfill the Prince that was Promised prophecy, and to bring dragons back into the world, and whatever other lore that Rhaegar was into. However, Lyanna Stark did not give birth to a daughter named Visenya, rather a boy called Jon Snow, in Game of Thrones at least, but probably in the books as well. Game of Thrones also decided to name Jon Snow Aegon Targaryen, despite the fact Rhaegar already had a son called Aegon Targaryen. So I'll talk about these 2 Aegons next. The official Aegon was said to have been murdered in 283 during the sack of King's Landing by Tywin Lannister's men. Sir Jaime Lannister still agonizes over not being able to protect him and Rhaenys. However, a young man appears in Book 5 of A Song of Ice and Fire called young Griff, and he claims to be Aegon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar and Elia. If he truly is that Aegon, Varys the Spider may have swapped him as a baby with another baby, since they all look the same, right? And sent the real Aegon across the Narrow Sea to be raised by Illyrio. There's also a popular theory, however, that Aegon is the son of Illyrio, and a female descendant of House Blackfyre, a cadet branch of House Targaryen, which was started by Daemon Blackfyre, the bastard son of Aegon IV, who began the Blackfyre rebellions. Regardless of whether he is a Targaryen, a Blackfyre, or a nobody, his name is still Aegon, and he has big plans for himself. By the end of Book 5, he's landed in Westeros with the Golden Company, and has begun to take castles in the Stormlands. He will almost certainly take Storm's End in the Winds of Winter, and rival Cersei Lannister and King Tommen Baratheon for the Iron Throne. He needs allies, though. We know from a Winds preview chapter that Arianne Martell, the heir to Dorne, is going to meet Aegon, and if they get married and ally against the Lannisters, Dorne would get revenge for Elia and Oberyn's deaths, while Aegon would get thousands of much-needed swords at his command. Jon Connington, the exiled Lord of Griffin's Roost in the Stormlands, is helping Aegon do all this. He was originally friends with Rhaegar, before Robert's Rebellion, and Jon Con wishes to put Prince Rhaegar's son on the throne, since he failed to protect Prince Rhaegar himself. Connington mentions that he has friends in the Reach, so perhaps houses like Tarly or Hightower or Redwyne could join Aegon's cause. All in all, Aegon looks primed to become Aegon Targaryen, 6th of his name, in the Winds of Winter. Jon Snow is probably not called Aegon in the books, because that would be silly. Some readers want him to be named Aemon, like Maester Aemon, or Aemon the Dragon Knight, who Jon imagined himself as when he was a young boy, sparring with his brother Robb. But in Game of Thrones, Jon could have become Aegon Targaryen, 6th of his name, and King of Westeros, had he wanted to.
I don't want it. You are my queen. I don't know what else I can say.
As things stand in the HBO canon, Aegon would rather just be Jon Snow, and hang out with Tormund and Ghost north of the Wall. If the rumored Jon Snow sequel series happens, perhaps we'll see Jon wrestle with his second identity as Aegon Targaryen, since Game of Thrones didn't really play with that very much. His secret identity was more of a plot device to antagonize Daenerys, rather than to do anything at all with Jon's own storyline. Maybe we'll see him have a Targaryen dragon dream, and perhaps reconnect with Drogon, wherever he flew off to. I'm not sure, but you can leave a comment down below on what you think Aegon will be up to in the Jon Snow show. So there you have it, 12 Aegon Targaryens, including the Conqueror, the Usurper, the Dragonbane, the Unworthy, and the Unlikely. You can read about young Griff/Aegon in the Song of Ice and Fire novels if you haven't already, and his story will continue in The Winds of Winter, which George R. R. Martin is making progress on. But the Aegon you should keep your eye on for now is this little baby right here, because something tells me he's going to have a significant role to play in House of the Dragon. Let me know in the comments which Aegon Targaryen is your favorite Aegon Targaryen, and who you want to see adapted into an HBO series. And enjoy these 2 bonus Aegons, who aren't really Aegons so they didn't make the cut. Thanks for watching.